Your Honor, the prosecutor said, voice sharp. The defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread. At the defense table, an old man bowed his head. I just needed the strength to live one more day, he whispered. What shocking secret would change everything? The courtroom chuckled, but the judge didn't, because in that moment, as he read the man's name, his hands froze and his eyes filled with tears. Who was this man? And why did a simple loaf of bread bring the weight of a battlefield back into that quiet room? Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The Monroe County Courthouse didn't expect much from a Wednesday morning. A few petty thefts, a domestic dispute, maybe a probation violation or two. Nothing that couldn't be pushed through by noon. Outside, the Pennsylvania winter clung to the streets with stubborn gray ice. Salt crusted the sidewalks, the kind of cold that seeped through boots, through coats, through bones. Inside Courtroom 2B, the air felt just as cold, not from the weather, but from something older. Something like indifference. The bailiff called the next case without looking up. Case number 58417, State of Pennsylvania vs. Henry James Callahan. A shuffle of movement. Slow-labored Henry Callahan, age 66, moved toward the defendant's table, shackled at the wrists, his back hunched under a military field jacket. Older than most people in the room, the frayed straps of his rucksack dragged behind him, the fabric worn thin from too many miles on unforgiving pavement. He didn't look up, didn't meet anyone's eyes. His boots, Army issue circa Desert Storm, scraped against the linoleum floor, not from defiance, just weariness. In the front row, Judge Thomas Whitaker adjusted his glasses, a man who prided himself on efficiency. He read case files the way a butcher examines cuts of meat, quick, clinical, without sentiment. Shoplifting, prior offenses, homeless, standard nuisance case. Whitaker's pen hovered over the docket sheet. From the prosecutor's table, a young assistant district attorney stood. Your Honor, the defendant was apprehended yesterday afternoon at Patterson's Grocery. Attempted theft of a loaf of bread. Security footage confirms the act. This marks his third offense in under 6 months. The state recommends 30 days detention with a no trespass order for the downtown district. The words fell flat. Practiced, rehearsed, detached. In the gallery, two interns stifled quiet laughter. Henry didn't react. He hadn't run from the store, hadn't argued. When Officer Tyler Rhodes placed the cuffs on him, Henry had only said one thing: I just needed strength to live one more day. Rhodes, 25, had felt his stomach knot, fresh out of the academy, still clinging to the notion that his badge meant protection, but orders were orders. Now standing near the courtroom doors, Rhodes shifted uncomfortably. Judge Whitaker flipped to the second page of the file and froze. Line 3, Henry James Callahan, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, Bronze Star recipient, Operation Phantom Fury, Fallujah, 2004. The courtroom didn't notice. The clerk kept typing. The prosecutor kept his posture straight. Henry kept his head down, but Whitaker felt something cold press against his ribs. A name, a year, a memory that didn't belong in this room, on this morning, in this file. His fingers gripped the paper tighter. He read it again. Fallujah. His throat dried. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. In 2004, Whitaker hadn't been wearing robes. He'd been wearing desert camo. A field medic assigned to a convoy that never made it through clean. He remembered the chaos, the screaming, the firefight, and he remembered a man dragging him through dust and blood while shrapnel tore at both their bodies. The name had been shouted across static. Callahan. Judge Whitaker looked up, truly seeing Henry for the first time. The sunken cheeks, the gray stubble, the stooped posture, but the eyes, when they flickered up briefly, were still sharp, still soldier's eyes. Whitaker stood. It wasn't planned, it wasn't dramatic, it just happened. The entire courtroom paused as if time itself had stuttered. Judges don't stand during shoplifting hearings. Whitaker's hands pressed against the bench, knuckles white. The prosecutor faltered mid-sentence, his polished rhythm shattered. Whitaker's voice, when it came, was rough. This court will recess for 15 minutes. Confusion rippled through the room, but no one questioned it. As Whitaker turned toward his chambers, his pulse hammered against his temples. He needed air, he needed clarity, and he needed to know if the man sitting in front of him, chained like a criminal, was the same man who had once cussed him out for bleeding all over the goddamn desert. What would this revelation mean? Henry Callahan remained seated, still silent, unimpressed by the commotion. This wasn't his first courtroom, wasn't his first time being treated as less than. He kept his eyes on the scuffed floor, ignoring the whispers. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Officer Rhodes glance at him, not with pity, but with something closer to guilt. 15 minutes, that's what the judge had asked for. Henry doubted it would change anything, but then again, in 15 minutes had once been the difference between life and death. He would know he had carried it on his back. Judge Thomas Whitaker closed his office door, leaning against it as though the weight of the courthouse itself had shifted onto his shoulders. Outside, voices carried in the hallway, attorneys, clerks, footsteps, somewhere to be routine humming along, but inside these four walls, nothing felt routine anymore. He sat at his desk, fingers curling around the edge, eyes locked on the file still open. The name stared back at him like a long-forgotten debt, Henry James Callahan. His hand hovered over the mouse. 4. A man who'd built a career on control. It was a rare hesitation. He navigated through the court's database, then deeper into veteran affairs archives he hadn't touched in years. Fallujah, 2004. Whitaker's throat tightened. He remembered the heat first, not the desert sun, but the heat of a fuel truck on fire, exploding in bursts of shrapnel. He remembered screaming into a useless radio, calling for evac that wouldn't come. And he remembered being dragged through hell. Callahan's grip had been iron. The man cussed him out for being too damn heavy, even as bullets whistled past them both. Whitaker hadn't known his full name, just Callahan, just the man who wouldn't let him die. Until today, he hadn't seen him again in 12 years. The file said 12 years off the grid after his honorable discharge. Henry Callahan had slipped through every crack a system could offer. A forwarding address bounced back. VA Communications marked him as no contact. Over time, the records thinned, reduced to a footnote of a man no longer on paper. The digital trail ended, but Whitaker knew on some level that was deliberate. He picked up his phone. The line rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Myers, Jake, it's Tom Whitaker. A pause, a wary one. Been a while. Judge, to what do I owe the honor? Whitaker didn't waste time. I found Callahan. That cut through. He could hear the shift on the other end, the chair creaking, the breath catching. Henry Callahan? Myers asked, voice suddenly sharp. Where? In my courtroom, charged with stealing a loaf of bread. The silence was heavy. You're kidding. I wish I was. Myers had been Callahan's CO back in those days. Rank was more formality than separation. They'd all bled the same. Myers owed his own life to Callahan's refusal to leave anyone behind. Whitaker's voice softened. Jake, he's not just homeless, he's invisible. The system lost him. No, Myers corrected. The system stopped looking. Whitaker exhaled through his teeth. He's due back in court this afternoon. I need you here. You'll have me there. When the line went dead, Whitaker sat in the quiet, staring at the file. For a long time, he told himself the past was another life, another man's burden. Today, it pulled up a chair across from him. Meanwhile, 2 floors down, Henry Callahan sat in the holding cell. The walls were off-white, concrete blocks that had soaked in decades of sweat and regret. No bars, just a heavy steel door with a small reinforced window. He sat still, hands resting on his knees. No one bothered him. Most didn't notice. He wasn't handcuffed anymore. Probably figured he wasn't going far. He wouldn't. Henry had walked away from a lot in his life. This, oddly enough, didn't feel like something to run from. His thumb brushed against a folded photo in his jacket pocket. Marianne's smile still creased the worn paper. She died in 2010, cancer eating through her faster than the VA had cared to admit. They told him it was indigestion at first, stress maybe. By the time they corrected themselves, it was stage 4. After she was gone, so was the apartment. Didn't feel like home. The paperwork felt like chains. The polite letters from agencies, that, unfortunately due to policy notices, the endless lines of forms, all of it turned to noise. So he'd stopped answering, stopped asking. The city had given him no reason to stay connected. The streets at least were honest. You're cold, find warmth. You're hungry, find scraps. Simple. A lot simpler than waiting for systems to remember you existed. He'd taken to keeping to himself. No panhandling, no signs, just bottles, cans, and the occasional kindness of a diner cook who remembered his name. But even that had its limits. 3 days without food was a different conversation. The loaf of bread at Patterson's wasn't about theft, it was about survival. And the courtroom, that was just the final station in a long line of places that forgot who he was. Henry leaned back, closed his eyes. He didn't know that above him, in a quiet office, a judge who once bled out in a Fallujah alley was piecing together the wreckage of his own gratitude. What would happen next? The next morning, Monroe County Courthouse was not itself. For a place accustomed to thin attendance and disinterested clerks, the crowd pressing into courtroom 2B was unusual. Veterans in worn ball caps, reporters lingering by the back wall, even a few city council members who hadn't set foot in this room for years. The defendant remained unchanged. Henry Callahan sat at the same table, same posture, shoulders slightly forward, hands resting calmly. His jacket, old and faded, seemed almost defiant amidst the starched suits, polished shoes around him. But today, no one looked past him, not after what had circulated overnight, not after a name had been remembered. Judge Thomas Whitaker entered from the side door, robe draped over his frame, but carrying a weight heavier than protocol. As he took his seat, his eyes flickered across the room and settled briefly on Henry. No nods, no theatrics, but something in the air had shifted. Court is now in session, the clerk announced. From the prosecution's side, the young ADA rose again, but this time his confidence had cracks. He adjusted his tie twice before speaking. Your Honor, the state wishes to present new evidence regarding the defendant's background. Colonel Jacob Myers has been called to testify. Colonel Myers, 61 and built like the brick walls outside, took the stand. His dress blues were impeccable, but the lines on his face told the real story. When sworn in, he didn't hesitate. Colonel, please state your relation to the defendant. I served with staff Sergeant Henry Callahan during Operation Phantom Fury Fallujah 2004, he was under my command, his voice was gravel, but steady. In November of that year, our convoy was ambushed, RPGs hit our lead vehicles, fuel trucks caught fire, the enemy had the high ground, we were pinned down, cut off, a hush fell over the room. Myers continued, while most sought cover, Callahan did the opposite, he got into a burning fuel truck and drove it, flaming, mind you, away from our position, preventing an explosion that would have taken out every man there. He paused, letting it hang. After that, despite shrapnel wounds, Callahan carried wounded men one by one back to a makeshift safe zone, 14 men. He refused evacuation until every last one of them was accounted for. Myers turned, meeting Whitaker's gaze. Your Honor, you were one of them. A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery. Judge Whitaker's face remained composed, but his fingers tensed over the bench's edge. Colonel, did Sergeant Callahan receive recognition for his actions? Myers exhaled slowly. He was recommended for the Silver Star, but following his discharge, paperwork fell through. His wife passed away in 2010. After that, he disconnected. The system stopped looking. No forwarding address, no follow-up. Somewhere along the line, his benefits were terminated due to an administrative error. Myers produced a folder, sliding it across to the clerk. Documentation from the Department of Veterans Affairs confirms this. For 12 years, Staff Sergeant Callahan was owed disability benefits totaling $262,000. The number settled over the room like a punch. Henry didn't react, not visibly, but his thumb rubbed the corner of his jacket just once. The ADA cleared his throat. While commendable, Colonel, the defendant is still charged with. Myers cut him off. Stealing a loaf of bread, yes, after 3 days without food, after 12 years of being ignored, after this country. This system failed him in every way except demanding his silence. His voice did not rise, it didn't need to. Whitaker leaned back in his chair. For a man whose job demanded detachment, today felt personal, dangerously so, but not because of sentiment, because of truth. He could feel the weight of every procedural manual, every policy binder, pressing down on the side of inaction, and yet, on the other side, there was a man who once dragged his broken body through a firefight, swearing at him the entire way. Staff Sergeant Callahan, Whitaker said, for the first time using his full title. Henry's head lifted. Not much, just enough. You have the right to address the court. Henry's voice was low, dry. I don't have much to say to Your Honor. I did what needed doing back then, same as anyone would. I never asked for recognition. Still don't took a loaf of bread cause it was that or fall asleep hungry. Again, he paused, fingers resting flat on the table. No one owes me anything, but maybe, just maybe, folks could stop pretending they don't see what's in front of them. Whitaker's throat tightened. He glanced at the prosecution. The young ADA hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly sat down. No further argument. The room held its breath. Whitaker's hand hovered over the gavel. His voice, when it came, was steady, firm. This court recognizes that no man is immune to the consequences of his actions, but it also recognizes that justice is not served by punishing the failures of the very system that allowed those consequences to fester. He let the word sink in. Therefore, the court hereby dismisses all charges against Staff Sergeant Henry Callahan. Furthermore, it strongly recommends the immediate review and reinstatement of all owed benefits and honors. The gavel struck once, but it echoed like a rifle report. In the gallery, veterans nodded, some stood, a few saluted quietly without fanfare. Henry remained seated, but the lines around his mouth softened, the weight on his shoulders shifted. For the first time in 12 years, he was called by his name, not as a file, not as a problem, but as Staff Sergeant Callahan, and that to him mattered more than any medal. It didn't make the news. There were no cameras outside Monroe County Courthouse when Henry Callahan stepped onto the sidewalk that afternoon. No viral posts, no trending hashtags, just the dull gray of a Pennsylvania winter softening around the edges, the kind of quiet no one noticed unless you'd been invisible long enough to feel it. Henry zipped his old jacket, the same one frayed along the seams, the same one that smelled of years spent beneath overpasses and behind steam vents. No one offered him a microphone, no one shoved a spotlight in his face, and that was fine. He'd never wanted to be a headline. Behind him, inside the courthouse, Judge Thomas Whitaker sat at his desk, staring at a brass plaque newly mounted in the entrance hall. To those who served, even when forgotten, it hadn't been his idea. A clerk had suggested it after watching the silence in that courtroom the day before. Whitaker hadn't objected. He hadn't attended the quiet installation ceremony either. He wasn't interested in gestures for show. Instead, he spent that morning on the phone with the Monroe Veterans Outreach Program, asking pointed questions about their intake process. How many homeless vets had they failed to track? How many Henry Callahans had slipped through? No one applauded him for that either. He didn't need it. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm, but not quite the same. At the edge of town, Monroe Veterans Housing opened a new unit, modest, clean, functional. Henry Callahan's name was quietly added to the lease papers. He hadn't asked for anything fancy, a small room, a solid lock, a bed that didn't fold under a bridge's shadow. For a man who had once kept everything he owned in a battered rucksack, it was enough. Most mornings, Henry walked down Liberty Street, same road as always, past the same shops, the same people, but something had changed. At Patterson's grocery, a new kid worked the morning shift, 17, maybe 18. His apron hung loose, his name tag read Evan, the first time Evan saw Henry pass. He paused at the entrance. Morning, Sergeant Callahan. Just that, no cameras, no speeches, just a kid calling a man by the name he'd carried through sandstorms and city streets. Henry's reply was simple, a nod at the slightest tug of a smile at the corner of his mouth. It became their ritual every morning, like clockwork. It wasn't recognition on a grand scale, but it was real. And sometimes real is louder than the applause that fades after the news cycle ends. Judge Whitaker continued his work. Robe's crisp voice steady, his courtroom remained a place of order of rules, but on Fridays, after the last case was filed away, he spent an extra hour reviewing veteran-related dockets, cross-referencing names, looking for patterns the system might have missed, not because he was paid to, because some debts weren't written in ink. For Henry, life settled into quiet routines, mornings at the corner cafe, a black coffee, 2 sugars, no cream. Afternoons walking the park perimeter, the cold air biting, but welcome, reminding him he was still here, still breathing. Once Evan asked why he always chose the same path, Henry's answer was plain, because the ground doesn't move under you when you know it. That answer seemed to satisfy them both. There was no parade, no surprise ceremonies, but every now and then a folded note appeared by Henry's usual bench, handwritten, simple words from strangers who had heard whispers of a man who once carried others through fire. No signatures, no demands, just gratitude folded small, enough to carry in a jacket pocket. Henry didn't keep them all, but he read every one. In the courthouse, Judge Whitaker kept a copy of Callahan's service photo pinned behind his office door, not on display for others, just where he could see it when reaching for his coat at the end of a long day. It was a reminder, not of guilt, but of responsibility. One afternoon, months after the trial, Whitaker crossed paths with Callahan outside the cafe. No courtroom barrier, no bench between them, just 2 men older now, carrying different weights. Sergeant, Whitaker said with a respectful nod at Judge. Henry replied, matching it. No more words were needed. They both understood. Some debts are repaid not with grand gestures, but with a simple act of remembering. As spring nudged the frost back into the hills, Monroe County went on with its life. New cases, new faces. But among the noise, the quiet presence of a man walking Liberty Street remained constant. Evan still greeted him each morning. Others began to follow, not out of obligation, but because in a world eager to forget, there was quiet power in choosing to see. Henry Callahan never asked for that, but as he passed the courthouse steps, his gaze lingered on the small brass plaque by the door. To those who served, even when forgotten, he didn't stop. He didn't need to, because that morning, for the first time in a long time, he felt like his name, his real name, had been returned to him, not with fanfare, not with noise, but with dignity. And for a man like Henry Callahan, that was enough. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.